connect a region of over 600 mil bridges between our lands.
Hello, I'm Esther Adanga. Welcome to ASEAN in Focus.
And hello, I'm Gila Pablo, bringing you the latest news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines, the Philippines is now considered low risk under the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's new system for travel risk assessment based on declining COVID-19 cases.
Rescue workers in Indonesia were searching for survivors Tuesday after a mini market collapse killed 5 people and injured 9.
Global financial conditions have tightened notably and downside risks to the economic outlook have increased as a result of the war in Ukraine.
New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern unveiled a Maui Kuaha sculpture in Singapore Tuesday on her first trip abroad since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
First in our news, the Philippines is now considered low risk under the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's new system for travel risk assessment based on the declining COVID-19 cases. As of April 18, the U.S. CDC data showed that in the Southeast Asia, only the Philippines and Myanmar are under level 1 or COVID-19 low. For a destination to be placed under this level, it must have 49 or fewer new cases per 100,000 residents over the past 28 days. The U.S. CDC system has placed nations into these categories: Level 3 or higher risk for COVID-19, Level 2 moderate risk for COVID-19, Level 1 low risk for COVID-19, and unknown, which not have enough data to assess the risk. European nations, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom, and other popular travel spots like Brazil, Canada, Egypt, Malaysia, Mexico, South Korea, and Thailand are categorized as high risk or level 3. COVID-19 cases in the Philippines are on decline, recording a daily average of only 224 for the week April 12 to 18, or 17% lower than the preceding week's 271. The total tally of new cases for the same week is 1,571.
Meanwhile, China reported 7 COVID-19 deaths in Shanghai on Wednesday, raising the toll in the city to 17 fatalities as authorities struggle to rein in infections despite a grueling weeks-long lockdown. The fast-spreading Omicron coronavirus variant has driven a huge spike in cases in the metropolis of 25 million people, and the government has imposed tight movement restrictions and multiple rounds of mass testing to combat the outbreak. The lockdown has taken a heavy social and economic toll, with the residents voicing their fury on social media over food shortages and lack of access to non-COVID medical care. The 7 newly reported deaths were cases with underlying conditions such as lung cancer and diabetes, city authorities said. 5 of the patients were people over the age of 70. Shanghai government website said the patients became severely ill after admission to hospital and died after ineffective rescue efforts, with the direct cause of death being underlying disease. The city reported more than 18,000 new and mostly asymptomatic coronavirus cases on Wednesday. More than 400,000 infections have been reported in Shanghai since March, and the city reported its first COVID deaths on Monday.
Now let's go over to Malaysia, where Alfred Balmes have more updates about COVID-19. Is it true, Alfred, that senior there will be forced to take a second booster shot?
According to Malaysia Health Minister Khairi Hamaluddin, high-risk senior citizens will not be forced to take a second booster shot. He said that these individuals would be given a choice whether or not to take the additional protection against severe COVID-19 symptoms. Khairi said the MOH also started using the antiviral drug Paxlovid as a therapeutic to treat high-risk COVID-19 patients. He said the antiviral drug was aimed at treating patients and not a substitute vaccine, adding that the MOH would purchase more of the drug. The health minister said professional RTK antigen tests, supervised via virtual consultations, are now allowed to facilitate the public to conduct such tests. He added if there are need to conduct professional RTK tests, they can be done via live video and you can get your test result through email. For example, medical practitioner can offer this service to the public. Apart from that, he said recipients of Sinovac and Sinopharm primary vaccine and who will be traveling to countries that do not recognize these vaccines could get other vaccines as their second booster dose by applying via MySigatera applications or via walk-in at vaccination centers. He said further details regarding vaccination centers that are still operational could be found on the website protecthealth.com.my. For teenagers with a weak immune system or immunocompromised, Khairi said this group too could now obtain the booster dose, but they need to check with their physicians for booster details. This is important because there is a slight increase in COVID-19 cases among teenagers. So for this group, you can take the booster shot to stay safe. Khairi said he would announce the latest development with regards to the Hari Raya Idul Fitr celebrations as well as several other announcements next week. Reporting from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, this is Alfred Balmes and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden will meet in midway May with the leaders of Southeast Asian nations with a likely focus on the rising power of China, the host country announced Saturday. The summit, originally scheduled for March, will demonstrate the United States' enduring commitment to ASEAN. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said in a statement, referring to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. I quote, "It is a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration to serve as a strong, reliable partner in Southeast Asia," the statement said. The summit, originally set for March 28 and 29 before being delayed without a new date, will now take place on May 12 and 13. The meeting was postponed amid reports that the leaders of some ASEAN members had scheduling conflicts and as the Ukraine crisis continued to deepen. Biden had participated in a virtual summit with ASEAN leaders in October. In that summit, Psaki noted in her statement, Biden announced initiatives to expand U.S. engagement with ASEAN on COVID-19, climate change, economic growth, and more. The U.S. statement Saturday did not make clear whether the leaders of Myanmar would in fact attend. The administration has accused the country's military leaders of perpetrating a genocide against the Rohingya minority. ASEAN has sought in vain so far to find a diplomatic solution since the military took power there in a 2021 coup.
Meanwhile, on March 29th, Biden met at the White House with a key ASEAN member, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong of Singapore, and said he wanted to ensure that the region remains free and open, a reference to what the U.S. sees as attempts by rising power China to dominate international trade routes. Take a look.
I'm looking forward to hosting the ASEAN leaders here in Washington, D.C. for a special summit this spring. We also discussed a wide range of concerns for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. That includes ensuring that all nations in the region, including China, uphold the principles that enable a free and open region.
A tense competition with China has become one of the greatest foreign policy challenges for the United States. Though other issues like the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the war in Ukraine have demanded more urgent attention. ASEAN members include Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Several of them have experienced growing friction with Beijing.
Rescue workers in Indonesia were searching for survivors Tuesday after a mini market collapse killed 5 people and injured 9 in a country where lax construction standards have raised concerns about building safety. The 3-floor building in Borneo Island's Banjar district suddenly crumbled on Monday afternoon while it was filled with customers and employees before Muslims broke their daily fast for the Islamic month of Ramadan. Emergency services were dispatched to the scene to dig overnight, pulling 5 bodies from the rubble and freeing 9 people. In 2020, at least 2 people were injured as a 5-story building in Jakarta partly collapsed. Previously, in 2018, a group of teenagers practicing for a dance and music show were among 7 killed when the building they were in collapsed in Cirebon, east of Jakarta. In the same year, at least 75 people were injured when a mezzanine floor at Indonesia's stock exchange building in Jakarta collapsed into the lobby.
Meanwhile, hundreds of Rohingya migrants from Myanmar broke out of a detention center in northern Malaysia on Wednesday, with 6 killed on a highway as they escaped, according to the authorities. Many Rohingya arrived in Malaysia by boat after enduring harrowing months-long sea journeys. Those that are caught are often sent to detention centers, which rights groups say are typically overcrowded and filthy. The country's immigration chief, Khairul Zaimi Daud, said a total of 528 people from the Muslim minority group fled a center in Kedah State at 4:30 in the morning. He said they broke through a door and barriers at a temporary immigration center. 6 of the detainees were killed as they sought to cross a highway after escaping. Those killed were 2 adult men, 2 adult women, 1 girl, and 1 boy. Police, other agencies, and the public are hunting for the detainees still missing. Relatively affluent Muslim-majority Malaysia is a key destination for Rohingya fleeing persecution in their predominantly Buddhist homeland or refugee camps in Bangladesh.
The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council on Wednesday reported initial 11,279 houses were damaged by Tropical Depression Agaton in 8 regions, which battered a large part of the country last week. These areas are in regions 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, and the Caraga. Meanwhile, infrastructure damage was placed at 6,950,000 Philippine pesos in regions 6, 7, 10, and the BARMM. Families affected by Agaton are placed at 600,062 in 2,427 barangays in regions 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, Caraga, and the BARMM. To date, there are 450 evacuation centers sheltering 29,978 families, with the remainder being aided by families and friends. The NDRRMC has so far confirmed 18 deaths, 6 injured, and 7 missing due to the effects of Agaton. Still undergoing validation are reports of 160 dead, 2 injured, and 104 missing.
And the Philippine Embassy in Moscow kicked off the 2022 overseas absentee voting with active support from members of the Filipino community in Russia and Philippine media correspondents. Net 25's Sherilyn Carlos was there. Take a look.
The Philippines Embassy in Moscow, Russia, held an outreach program regarding the Mobile Overseas Voting Mission 2022 that was held at Honorary Consulate General of the Philippines located at Grabanskaya Street 12, St. Petersburg, Russia. With the supervision of Consul General Sergei Alexiev, with the help of the two great embassy staff from Moscow, Russia, namely Consul General Robert Ferrer Jr. and Attaché Alex Sunga.
So the objective of this exercise is to make available the right to vote to all Filipinos worldwide, and also to make sure that the Philippine Embassy in Moscow, aided by our Philippine Honorary Consulate in St. Petersburg and in Armenia, and in other areas of Russia, to be able to provide facilities so that Filipinos can cast their vote without any difficulty in good facilities like what we have here in St. Petersburg. And because of the host government's cooperation, in this case the Russian Federation, and also hopefully the Republic of Armenia, we will be able to bring the ballots of the Filipinos to all those areas where there are a significant number of Filipino voters. And their votes will be secured by the Special Ballot Reception and Custody Group in Russia, headed by myself. And the voting process will be made orderly and safe, because we still have new COVID-19 strains, even the stealth strain. And it is also for the protection of Filipinos who are coming to the embassy to vote, not just for our protection. And we will make sure that the votes will be secure. And because this is a sacred duty of every Filipino, my message to every Filipino is, you have until May 9, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Moscow time, to come to the embassy, claim your voting packets and accomplish them. We have provided facilities for you to do that, and drop them inside the receptacle or ballot box. And starting May 9, at the close of the polling, we shall be conducting the canvassing. And mabuhay po ang Pilipinas. Congratulations to all those who have voted. And those who have not yet voted, you still have time until May 9, 2 o'clock p.m. at the Philippine Embassy, Karmanitsky Peryolok, number 8, Moscow.
From the Bureau of St. Petersburg, Russia, I am Sherilyn Carlos. We live an interesting time.
Thank you, Sherilyn. And the news continues here in ASEAN in Focus. We will be back right after this.
Mr. Bawal, ang galing mo namang sumayaw. Pwedeng pa-copy ng dance steps mo? Oo naman, Mr. Pwede. Mr. Bawal, ang ganda rin ng forma mo. Pwedeng pa-copy ng forma mo? Oo ba? Mr. Bawal, pakopya naman sagot mo. Yan ang hindi pwede. Ang pagsilip sa sagot ng iba, lalong-lalo na sa botohan, oy, bawal yan!
Ayon sa Omnibus Election Code, ang pagtatangkang silipin at alamin ang boto ng iba ay isang election offense.
Mr. Pwede? Please report to the principal's office.
Ako si Mr. Bawal, nagpapaalala sa inyo na ang pagsilip sa boto ng ibang botante, oy, bawal yan!
A public service message of Net25 for Mata ng Halalan 2022. Matatag, matapang, matapat.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Ilalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome back to the program. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly meets with the Vietnamese counterpart Vu Thanh Son and Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh as part of her Indo-Pacific trip. Let's listen in.
Yes, indeed, it is my first trip to Asia as Foreign Minister. It is coming at a time where a lot of things are happening in the world, but at the same time, it is coming at a moment where we're developing our first Indo-Pacific strategy. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we can further our support and relationship as many things are happening.
In its news release, Canada said beyond the Pacific coastline in geographic proximity, Canada and the Indo-Pacific region have shared histories, cultures, and significant people-to-people ties. It said that Canada is committed to deepening diplomatic, security, trade, and economic engagement in the region to ensure that they are seizing opportunities for Canadians and advancing shared priorities. Before landing in Hanoi, Joly was in Indonesia, where she kickstarted her first trip to Asia as foreign minister. She will also engage in discussions on pressing global challenges, including the need for a diplomatic solution on the unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine and the efforts of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to address the ongoing crisis in Myanmar. Throughout her trip, Minister Joly will stress Canada's commitment to pursuing engagement in the Indo-Pacific region.
Ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi is expected to hear the first verdict in one of her corruption trials next week, a source close to the case told AFP Tuesday, where she faces a possible 15 years in jail. The junta court is expected to rule Monday on allegation that she took a bribe from former Yangon Chief Minister Phyo Min-ten. In November, she and 15 other officials, including Myanmar's former president Win Myint, were also charged with alleged electoral fraud during the 2020 elections. Since the coup, many of her political allies have been arrested, with one chief minister sentenced to 75 years in jail, and others have gone into hiding. The Nobel laureates have been detained since her government was forced out in a coup last year. She faces a raft of charges that could see her sentenced to more than 150 years in jail. The 76-year-old has already been handed a 6-year sentence for violating COVID-19 rules and walkie-talkie import regulations, but this is the first of her corruption cases to return a verdict. Under a previous junta regime, Suu Kyi spent long periods under house arrest in her family mansion in Yangon.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres presented the first detailed policy brief issued by the Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy, and Finance, which he set up to study the effects of the war in Ukraine on the world's most vulnerable. Let's listen in.
The war is supercharging a three-dimensional crisis: food, energy, and finance, that is pummeling some of the world's most vulnerable people, countries, and economies. And all this comes at a time when developing countries are already struggling with the slate of challenges not of their making: the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and the lack of access to adequate resources to finance the recovery in the context of persistent and growing inequalities. We are now facing a perfect storm that threatens to devastate the economies of many developing countries. The impact of the war is global and systemic. As many as 1.7 billion people, one-third of whom are already living in poverty, are now highly exposed to disruptions in food, energy, and finance systems that are triggering increases in poverty and hunger. 36 countries count on Russia and Ukraine for more than half of their wheat imports, including some of the poorest and most vulnerable countries of the world. And prices were already on the rise, but the war has made a bad situation far worse. Inflation is rising, purchasing power is eroding, growth prospects are shrinking, and development is being stalled, and in some cases, gains are receding. Many developing economies are drowning in debt, with bond yields already on the rise since last September, leading now to increased risk premiums and exchange rate pressures. And this is setting in motion a potential vicious circle of inflation and stagnation, the so-called stagflation. This war must end. The people of Ukraine cannot bear the violence being inflicted on them, and the most vulnerable people around the world cannot become collateral damage in yet another disaster for which they bear no responsibility. We need to silence the guns and accelerate negotiations towards peace now, for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the region, and for the people of the world.
Global financial conditions have tightened notably, and downside risks to economic outlook have increased as a result of the war in Ukraine. The IMF announced Tuesday with the release of the Global Financial Stability Report. Again, take a look.
The key theme to our latest Global Financial Stability Report is the implication of the war in Ukraine on the global financial system. The report provides analysis of the underlying risks and transmission channels in the short and medium term in light of financial system vulnerabilities that were already in existence. The report shows how higher commodity prices, together with prolonged supply disruptions, have made pre-war inflationary pressures worse. The war has also caused spikes in volatility across asset classes, reflecting greater uncertainty about the underlying global economic outlook. As of now, the war is not seen as a global systemic event that poses an immediate threat to financial stability. However, the war is having repercussions globally and through various channels, including through the rising commodity prices, food insecurity, and exposures of financial institutions to Russian and Ukrainian assets. Since the beginning of the year, financial conditions have tightened significantly across most of the world. Rising inflation, together with a rapid decline in equity prices and the expectation of rate hikes, have led to a notable tightening in advanced economies and in some emerging markets with close ties to Russia and Ukraine. The challenge for central banks, in advanced economies in particular, will be to bring inflation back to target while avoiding an excessive tightening of global financial conditions that would put their economies' growth at risk. Emerging markets face an especially challenging environment going forward. Inflationary pressures were already high before the war in many economies across Latin America and Eastern Europe. But emerging and frontier markets now also face higher risks of capital outflows as investors reassess their exposures to emerging markets in light of US monetary policy tightening and the heightened geopolitical uncertainty. European markets also face special challenges in the environment given the dependency on energy trade with Russia. Policymakers need to remain vigilant. Although there has been no material systemic event so far, financial stability risks have risen, as have risks to the post-pandemic economic recovery. We see 4 areas of action. Central banks should act decisively to prevent inflationary pressures from becoming entrenched. They should also avoid a situation where inflation expectations become unmoored. By that, I mean a situation where everybody expects to see continued high inflation. In emerging markets, policy normalization should be continued to be based on a country-specific assessment of inflation and economic outlook, as well as commodity price effects. Globally, regulators should assess the implications of increased volatility in commodity markets on how the markets are functioning and how risk is managed. Lastly, policymakers should intensify their efforts to implement the roadmap laid out by the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26, while also addressing energy security concerns.
In addition, IMF says rising inflation, economic impact of the war in Ukraine, and the lingering effects of pandemic have led the IMF to cut its global growth forecast for this year and next. Geopolitical tensions are leading to speculation that a new multipolar world may arise, where Europe and the US are in one system and China and Russia are siloed off. The fund's chief economist Pierre-Olivier Godinchas called that model a potential disaster for the global economy. Again, let's watch this.
Overall economic risks have risen sharply and policy trade-offs have become even more challenging. Compared to our January forecast, we have revised our projection for global growth downwards to 3.6% in both 2022 and 2023. This reflects the direct impact of the war on Ukraine and sanctions on Russia, with both countries projected to experience steep contractions. We now project inflation will remain elevated for much longer. In the United States and some European countries, it has reached its highest level in more than 40 years in the context of tight labor markets. The risk is rising that inflation expectations drift away from central bank inflation targets, prompting a more aggressive tightening response from policymakers. Furthermore, increases in food and fuel prices may also significantly increase the prospect of social unrest in poorer countries. So eventually, we know that we're going to be in a world in which it's not just the United States dollar, it's not just the dominance of the dollar. The question is what kind of transition we put in place to get there. And one scenario is one where we have divided blocks that are not trading much with each other, that are on different standards, and that would be a disaster for the global economy. The other scenario is one where we have a managed transition that maintains and protects the gains from globalization that have lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, have allowed emerging market economies to see their economies soar in the last 30, 40 years. And so the difficulty here is going to be to engage on this managed transition path that leads us to this more multipolar world. Central banks have accumulated a fair amount of credibility in terms of maintaining price stability over the last 40 years that they did not have back in the 1970s. So we're starting from a very different point. Nevertheless, inflation is a serious concern right now in the US and in other countries. And the risk that inflation pressures remain elevated, that inflation expectations start moving up away from the central bank targets of 2%, is something that would call for much more forceful action in the future.
UN aid agencies and partners said on Tuesday that they're continuing to push to get aid to Ukraine's most vulnerable people amid devastating Russian shelling and attacks on healthcare facilities and personnel. An estimated 6 million people need food and cash assistance, according to the World Food Programme, or WFP, which has been able to provide relief to previously inaccessible areas, such as Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, and Borodyanka. But the agency's emergency coordinator for Ukraine, Yakov Kern, insisted that sustained humanitarian access was critical if those in dire need of help in places like Mariupol are to be reached. Let's take a look.
City of Mariupol, 100,000 people would probably need about 2 or 3 trucks a day for just food alone, let alone all the other items. So it's not the question of going with 10 trucks once a month. That's not going to cut it. So these pauses are very important. And as I said, it needs agreement from all sides. And so far, we haven't managed to get that.
Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana and his U.S. counterpart Lloyd J. Austin III met at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday for another bilateral meeting to enhance the two nations' alliance. Lorenzana said his latest meeting with Austin would also be his farewell call as he ends his term as defense chief in 72 days. It was the third time Lorenzana personally met with Austin, once in Manila and twice in Washington, D.C. The two discussed strengthening mutual defense treaty commitments, enhancing maritime cooperation, and improving interoperability in information sharing. A statement released by the U.S. Defense Department said Austin lauded Lorenzana for advancing some of the alliance's initiatives. He added that this is a testament to the strength of the U.S.-Philippines alliance and friendship and Lorenzana's leadership. Austin pointed to the size of the joint U.S.-Philippine exercise Balikatan, the first since the beginning of the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, as an example of the vitality of the alliance between the nations. Austin said Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine points to the need for countries to stand together to defend the international rules-based architecture that has served the world well since the end of the World War II. We'll be right back after this break.
Alam mo ba, ang tapang pala ni paring Joey. Talaga ba? Oo. Tumalo siya sa aeroplano, walang dalang parachute. Paano mo nalaman niya? Sa buro niya.
Ito po ang inyong Tia Melchora. Nasaksihan natin ang masalimuot na buhay ni Leslie. Parang malungkot ka.
Ang aming game ay Balloon Centipede.
Bida na naman ang ating Sabado.
Welcome sa programa natin kung saan hindi ako, kung hindi kayo ang bida. Siksik liglig ang episode natin ngayon ng mga feel-good moments. Ngayon lang ulit ako nakakita ng cassette tape. Nandito naman tayo sa bundok na ulam at only rice. Sobrang nag-enjoy ako sa episode na to. Alam niyo naman ako, si Kwento. Siya po ang ating certified Be The Best of the Week.
Matagal mo nang hinahangaan. Tapos ngayon, na-meet ko sa personal.
Ang natutunan ko sa episode natin today is find what makes your heart sing.
Bida kayo kay Aga. Dito lang sa Net25.
Sa harap ko, yung isa naka-stripes, yung isa naka-lousy white collar na damit. Maganda naman siya, kaso parang tsaka ang damit.
Ano ba kayo? Wala nang iwanan to, ha? O, bilang. 1, 2, 3!
Ang sagot ni Saba, kaagad kay Pinya.
Ano? Ano nangyari? Ala, kilala kita, alam mo. Ang sama ng ugali mo, nakakainis ka naman eh.
Oh no! It's Biro only!
Oh no! It's B.O.
Sa Net 25.
It's B.O.
Welcome back. The World Health Day is a global health awareness celebrated every year on April 7 under the sponsorship of the WHO. Echo Hortaleza tells us how they celebrated the day in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. Echo?
The National Capital District celebrated World Health Day under the theme Our Planet, Our Health. Port Moresby Governor Powes Sparkup and the Active City Development Program and its partners from the World Health Organization and the Department of Health spearheaded the celebration of World Health Day by a morning walk and exercise from Southside Fitness Center to Sir Hubert Murray Stadium. World Health Organization Country Representative Dr. Sevil Husenova speaks about climate change and its effects on one's health.
This year is our planet, our health, which brings up so planetarian issues like climate change, clean air, like clean water, such matters that matters for our health, right? We can also use not a good source of energy like fossil burning or etc. that can pollute our air. Please get vaccinated for COVID-19. Protect yourself, protect your loved ones, and protect the people who are in elder group or more unfortunate positions. You protect me, for example, if you take a vaccine.
Other dignitaries and city officials attended the celebration to raise awareness on focusing global attention on climate actions needed to keep human and the planet healthy. This can also create the society to focus on one's well-being.
If I were to have an influence, if I were to have a purpose in my life, if I were to do this, it's for me to tell you, your health is your wealth.
We also have
eat healthy,
Active City Development
we've got a lot of rich food,
which is coming up
the
on
organic,
May 31st.
our garden food,
This is an event
fresh
that
fish,
we want to know
sort of change our lifestyle.
Come and dance for the
because,
environment and showcase
the
your
statistics
skills for a chance
shows
to
that almost 60% of
5,000 kina.
the deaths are
Registration
caused by
forms are here at
communicable
Southside
diseases,
Fitness
which
Center.
lifestyle diseases.
Port Moresby remains dedicated in its purpose of making its citizens proactive, progressive, and healthy. This is Echo Hortaleza Quinola, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
Our New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern unveiled a Maori Waha sculpture in Singapore Tuesday on her first trip abroad since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's watch this.
The kuwaha presents a symbolic doorway and is a metaphor for our reconnection. It very tangibly demonstrates our intention to strengthen the doorway between Aotearoa and Singapore and indeed the rest of the world. And I think if you had asked two nations like Singapore and New Zealand, who are so dependent on being gateways, so reliant on people coming and going, enjoying our surrounds, if you'd asked us whether or not in support of our people we would close our doors, it would be hard to imagine that situation, and yet that is where we found ourselves. So it feels to me incredibly symbolic that within the space of 8 weeks, New Zealand and Singapore both reopened their doors to one another at the time that we unveil this kuwaha.
A 3.2-meter tall sculpture named Kaniete Waira will be displayed among native New Zealand plants at Cloud Forest, a domed greenhouse at Gardens by the Bay. The sculpture is crafted from a tree that is estimated to be over 2,500 years old, which fell naturally in the forest during a severe storm. It was carved by master carver James Richard and specialist carver Tommy Herbert of the New Zealand Maori Arts and Crafts Institute. Artern is leading a trade delegation to key trading partners Singapore and Japan in a bid to boost its COVID-hit economy as the country reopens its borders. And that's the latest news in the ASEAN region. And thank you for joining us today here in ASEAN in Focus. This is Gina Pablo from your Thailand Bureau.
Thank you. That's all we have for you for today. And see you again next week. I'm Esther Adanga, and we live in extraordinary times.
Napapansin ba ninyo, lumiliwanag ang mundo pag magkasama tayo?